People have become a lot more open to choosing partners for themselves. What I'm trying to help them navigate is that marriage is not the end all be all of life.
How can someone navigate between infatuation, attraction, and love?
Because we are not taught about this, we often miss out on the subtle differences that would help us differentiate between love versus one on one side and infatuation on the other.
What about drawing boundaries, Sid?
In our adult lives, as we build more awareness of healthy relationships, a really important concept becomes maintaining boundaries, not just with our partner, but also with our friends, with our family members.
How can I communicate to my partner that even being in a relationship with you, I feel lonely?
So, yes, you can be in a relationship and you can still feel lonely because you can still have needs that are unmet. And you may need your partner to show up in a different manner to be able to make you feel loved in that moment.
Listeners, we all have felt that sense of loneliness, whether we are sitting in a bustling cafe, surrounded by laughter, couples holding hands, and friends deeply engrossed in conversation. But yet, we often feel isolated, we all often feel alone. And if we are going through a heartbreak or some stress situation in life, that feeling of loneliness or aloneness gets even more deeper. And today we have with us Sid, who is going to be helping us, demystify, understand these moments of loneliness and how to better, cater to these moments where we find ourselves at the depths of being vulnerable. Yet we have to take some smart decisions, but we often find ourselves taking those stupid decisions. So let's listen from Sid today. Hi, Sid, how are you?
Good. How are you doing? Thank you so much for having me here. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Same here, Sid, same here. I am really looking forward to this topic. There's so many curious questions that I have listed down. So let's see how many we're able to cover during this podcast.
Absolutely.
Before we begin, why don't you give your introduction to the room?
Absolutely. So, I am a relationship coach. I specifically help people with heartbreak, but choose to help people more from a perspective of understanding their childhood traumas and understanding how our childhood experiences, our life up until now, kind of shape the choices that we make when we choose a partner or the kind of relationships we get into. So, the goal from my perspective is to really help people understand the subconscious choices that they make, the trauma driven choices that they may make, and
Mhm.
make healthier choices so that they can be in happier relationships, fulfilling relationships. That's something that all of us crave, but we realize that not all of us have the tools to actually seek that for ourselves. So that's what I try to bridge the gap with.
Well, I believe relationship coaching is something that's really required in today's world, where I was just going through your Instagram post, the latest post that you would have made. It talked about that we are taught mathematics, physics, and chemistry in schools, but nobody teaches us how to manage relationships, how to manage our emotions.
Absolutely. And it's so true. Like when I figured out what I figured out, which is what made me want to become a coach, I was just shocked because this is the kind of information I would have wanted to know in my college, at least. Maybe in high school, I didn't have the maturity to fully grasp these concepts and how childhood trauma would shape me. But at least in university, when we are getting ready for the real world, we're taught out how to get a job, but we're not taught how to get a relationship, whereas society still deems important that we should have a relationship, and we have cravings and need for a connection and for a relationship as well. So it's really fascinating to me that something as fundamental is not taught to us early on in our lives. The way I think of it, our life is in its essentials, it's really broken down into three things, like our finances, our career, which is a part of our finances also. The second would be our health. And then the third is relationships. And so it's a very foundational pillar for any life you want to build. And oftentimes, if any one of these three things is off balance, whether it's your job or your finances, whether it's your physical health, mental health, or whether it's your relationships, it inevitably impacts the other two as well, because the load on the other two to support your life becomes too much. And I just get baffled by how this is something that there is not enough education and awareness about early on.
I agree. So the landscape in last 2 decades, when we talk about the relationships or the society as a whole, has evolved a lot, both for the positives as well as for the negatives as well. On
Absolutely.
one hand, where the genders have found their voice, they have found their stance out there, and they have become aware on what points to take a stand for. Vis-a-vis, there is another section of the whole evolution where things have just gone a little bit more negative, where people used to put in efforts to make the relationships work. Under different facades, they have started to give up very easily. Or the urge or the need to have that instant gratification is leading to breakups, is leading to people walking away from serious relationships, not putting in those efforts and expecting the other person only to evolve. So what are your thoughts on this?
That's a very fascinating topic that you've raised, Pulkit. I think it's so true that in our life right now, attention span has reduced significantly. Whether we want to blame social media for it, whether we want to blame Netflix for it, I don't have the right answer for that. But I know that if you look at the science behind it, the average uh, attention span of the individual is significantly lower than what it used to be. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of this is with the evolution of technology, everything is now at our fingertips.
Yep.
We don't need travel agents anymore because we have Expedia and Kayak and Skyscanner. We don't need cable TV anymore, and we can watch things ad free because we have Netflix and Amazon Prime or Disney Plus. So everything is in our fingertips, and because of that, that easy access to everything, anytime something is a little bit more challenging, anytime something requires a little bit more effort, we withdraw from it. And so that is an important aspect when it comes to relationships as well. Because look, at the end of the day, and I'm speaking from my perspective right now, when I was growing up, Shah Rukh Khan was a huge influence on me, right? In terms of what love should look like, right? And only now in my adult life, when I'm navigating relationships, do I realize that a lot of what we are taught in our childhood and a lot of what influences us in our childhood is not actually true. The real world does not work like that. There isn't a villain out there who we need to beat up in order to get to our princess. And once we get to our princess, it's not that we will have a happily ever after for the rest of our lives. Because love is a yes, it's a feeling, right? Yes, you feel this immense connection with someone, and you wish the best for them and you want to be with them. But love is also a choice. It requires you to step up every morning and want to make the relationship work, want to show the care, concern, understanding, empathy for your partner. And in the world that we live in today, somehow this definition of love has gotten mixed up. And that's why what we are seeking now is different from what we should be seeking. And I'm not speaking for everybody over here. I'm sure that there are a lot of aware people out there who know that it takes commitment and compromise and sacrifice and things like that to make love happen. But a lot of us, especially as we get influenced by media, and also what we choose to believe in, we start thinking of love that it should just be easy. And if it is difficult, that means we need to run away from it. And that's hopefully, with the work that I do, hopefully I can change a few perspectives and create more awareness about this.
I totally agree. And you brought up the point of Shah Rukh Khan being the influencer for all of us. I believe for most of the millennials out there, or at least Gen Z, the Bollywood or the Hollywood movies are, a big influence. Even for me, movies like The Notebook, Titanic, the Nottingham Hill, if I'm not getting the name correctly, I'm not sure if that's the correct name, but
Yeah,
these are some of the Hollywood influences I have on myself. And then when it comes
absolutely.
to Bollywood, Mohabbatein is there, Kuch Kuch Hota is there.
Absolutely.
And the moment the adulting hits you. You realize it's not all that dupatta for, getting stuck in your bracelet or all those things, or you
Exactly.
have to not constantly nagging or pursuing a girl. It's a
Absolutely.
lot of efforts which is beyond that. They are somewhere or the other compressing months, if not years, months and weeks of efforts into just those 3 hours, and it all just that it just happened, which is
Exactly.
not exactly the case. Nobody
No,
talks about the, pain that you go through, the emotional turmoil that's happening, whether she loves me or whether he loves me or not. Those
absolutely.
questions that you do, you bring a flower and you're like, okay, she loves me not, she loves me, she loves me not, she loves me. And you're playing all those games you have in school. We used to have flames as a game.
Yes, I remember flames. Yes. Ah, what
Love is
fun
much more
times.
beyond that.
Absolutely. Sorry.
Yeah. So just, continuing on this point of Bollywood and Hollywood being our influence, what do you think? How or where should emotional management or relationship management should be introduced in an individual's life at what particular stage?
That's a great question. The way I think about it is probably university. Of course, I don't have enough scientific backing to conclude this,
Mhm.
but I think that if you are to be considered an adult at 18, then at that point in time, as you are let out in the world, and hopefully you're figuring out adulting and you're figuring out relationships, this is when this topic becomes very relevant. And it's not that parts of it couldn't be introduced in high school, because as we know, the timeline of our first relationship has reduced from back in the day. Back in the day, if I uh, think about this correctly, people were asked to get married at a young age. Now that is hopefully not happening, at least not to the extent that it used to. And so people get into relationships, and there was a time when people were choosing to get into relationships after university or when they have a job and things like that. But now dating is very common in high school as well. And so there is an element of some topics which are more basic, fundamental, that can be introduced when we know people are starting to date, and matching the timeline with that. But we also want to be aware that not everybody has the emotional bandwidth at that age to digest the concept of trauma and the impact of trauma in our lives, in our relationships. And so we do want them to have a certain level of maturity, certain level of awareness, where they are seeking this kind of information, or whether this information can actually be beneficial for them. And so I would assume it's somewhere towards the end of high school and during university when this becomes really relevant. And a lot of at least fundamental topics should be introduced at that time.
Okay. See, I totally agree with you when you talk about the timelines of relationships. Earlier, we had teenagers getting married as young as 13 years or 14 years of age. And in India, that was a very normal scenario. Um,
Absolutely.
but help me understand, said one point. Now, if I look at today's context, where the average age, I'm not, again, don't have the exact statistics, but seeing in the circles around me, I have seen where earlier 25, 26 used to be the normal age that was thought to be okay. Now, by this age, I should be getting married. I hear people saying 35, 36, 34 is normal to get married today, not bringing in the biological factors into consideration, but
Sure.
yes, the career aspirations and all those from that perspective.
Absolutely.
34 to 36 is now said to be a really good age to marry.
Yeah.
Help me understand one point, said, and linking it to the exposures we get as a child, because I would really love to dive into the childhood trauma impacting the relationships. Before getting married or before that particular age, as per our parents or the society, we're not even allowed to talk to a girl or the opposite gender out there. We are always asked to refrain from talking to the opposite gender. And
Right.
suddenly, within a week or even in certain scenarios, just overnight, you're expected to fall in love with the selected one for you.
Exactly.
You may have not even just, not talked, not met. You're just put into an relationship, a relationship out there called marriage. and you're expected to sleep with them, fall in love with them, and the society is totally fine with it. How does that scenario work? Like, I'm in a phase where I'm also navigating relationships right now, and this really doesn't. I'm not able to digest this. How can you just get me a person and ask me, get start loving that person today?
It's fascinating, and I believe that this is also one of those areas where I don't have enough context and enough knowledge about the historical times and how things evolved. My guess is that back in the day, relationships would be a lot more transactional, right? One family had to send or had to give their daughter up to another family in the process of maybe building more societal connections or wishing a certain kind of life for their daughter. Oftentimes it was accompanied by dowry and all of this. So this is the area where I don't want to get deep into, because I know that this is not my area of expertise. But it is fascinating that change of what relationships used to mean back in the day, a union of families, a union of societies and things like that, to now focusing on the union of the husband and the wife themselves, because both of them are probably working, both of them live away from their parents, maybe their parents live in a completely different city from where they live as well, and so the life that they have to build is very independent and focused on the two of them, compared to back in the day when the entire family and the entire village would get involved. And so the perspective on relationships has changed from that idea, right? Having said that, people have become a lot more open to choosing partners for themselves. And I know that there are probably societies in India which still exist where families and communities make decision about who should get married to whom. But especially in the metropolitan cities, people are a lot more comfortable making their own decisions for themselves. And to your point, yes, maybe the age of getting married is has been pushed to much later, because there is a belief that they need to be at a certain level of financial accomplishment, at a certain level of emotional maturity and presence. But that doesn't mean people don't date, and people don't get into relationships, and people don't meet people of the opposite sex. And coming back to your point, yes, there is a social stigma about talking to the people of the opposite sex at a certain age, and then suddenly you are in this pool where you have to navigate conversations with the opposite sex and you don't know how to do that. But the more exposure the generations are getting, whether it's through university, whether it's through their workplace, they are building that comfort of talking to other people, and more importantly, being in relationships with other people. And what I'm trying to help them navigate is that marriage is not the end all be all of life. I mean, it is important if you believe it is important, and it has a place in society and life for sure. And I'm not going to dispute that. But if you are getting into the relationship for the sake of getting married, you may be compromising on a lot of fundamentals that make the relationship truly be happy on a long term basis. And so I'm trying to help people navigate the relationship part itself, so that they understand who they date, why they date who they date, who do they want to date, and what is the way of selecting the kind of people you want to date, so that the people you are dating, the person you are dating, is the person you want to be with, and you are able to navigate those next steps in a much healthier, much more secure way. I don't know if that exactly addresses your question, but hopefully it was comprehensive.
Yeah, to an extent it does. But help me understand, Sid, you mentioned a very important point of emotional maturity out there. Now, if I talk about myself,
Sure.
up till the class of 10th, I was in a co-ed school. 11, 12, I went where, though I had the exposure to co-ed, but most of the time I was living along with the boys.
Sure.
And I didn't get enough opportunities to talk to girls out there. Now,
Sure.
fast forward 2 years, I start my college, I start my university, and I'm having trouble talking to girls out there.
Right.
Now, as you rightly said, it gets very difficult to navigate that trough because at times you feel that you might not hurt the other gender. You don't want to, get into those categories of creepy people who are just after girls. And a lot of other things are there because with a lot of, you know, awareness being spread about, or I wouldn't say awareness, but the misuse of laws which are in favor of the opposite gender, females out there. Often a lot of things are happening which are not are being exploited for the male gender out there, and not diving too much into it, but it does get a little difficult to navigate that path. And in a society or in a scenario where the boys or the girls have always been suppressed of their needs, or have not been told how to navigate those needs, because when a body gets into the teenage, the hormonal changes that happen, even today in India, it's a taboo to talk about the changes that are happening during the teenage.
Yeah,
A lot
absolutely.
has changed in the urban societies, but
Yeah.
if you trace back to tier three, tier four, still the best medium is either the friends or the internet or the magazines, and those are not the right source. So, how do you really expect a grown up person who really didn't know how to navigate at that time be able to get that maturity at the age of 20, 25 to be able to navigate it at that age?
Yeah, that's a that's a tough question, Pulke. That's a it's something that the reason why I say it's tough is because that is something that it took me a lot of time to navigate as well. Right? There are all of these beliefs that we end up carrying from our childhood about firstly, we get so influenced by media, and we see all of these challenging cases that are happening, which are absolutely atrocious, and that's not how women should be treated. But unfortunately, it is prevalent in our society, and it shouldn't be. But that makes us a little bit more cautious as well as to how we want to approach women, or have conversations with them, where, and of course, women are also a little bit more on edge, on guard, and rightfully so, right? Because they need to be able to protect themselves in whatever ways they know how to. Having said that, it's also important because at the end of the day, both of us are looking for a connection. When I say both of us, I mean men and women
Yeah.
are looking for that connection, and both our genders, and all genders for that matter, are seeking the right companionship, right? What, from my vantage point, what it boils down to are the beliefs that you are carrying about yourself, about maybe men or women, and how do those beliefs subconsciously or even consciously shape your interactions with the people of the opposite sex. If you believe that there is a good chance that you are going to come out as, for the lack of a better word, creepy, there is a good chance you will come out like that, because you will be so in over your head that when you try to talk to a woman, in the process of not coming out creepy, you will not be able to come out as your authentic self, because you will be so conscious of how you are engaging in that conversation. And that actually makes a woman probably a lot more nervous than you imagine. The energy that you bring into that conversation makes her a lot more on edge, reserved, taken aback, because even though our intentions were completely different, right? And so the way I think of it is it's really important to show up in a conversation just as who you are, not how not how other men may behave, not how society may behave, not how women may interpret it, because you don't know how she's going to interpret it. So if you are trying to have a conversation with someone, just show up in the way you would. You want to be kind, you want to be respectful, you want to be appreciative, you want to give her the space and distance before she warms up, and then is a little bit more comfortable with you. If that is the case, of course, if this is a college environment or a work environment, then things are different because people know of each other, and there is an inherent trust kind of already built into the situation as well. So my point is that at the end of the day, when you are approaching someone, all you can do is be conscious of how you are choosing to show up, and that's what you want to focus on, instead of being worried about all the different things society has taught you, all the different ways you could go wrong, because if you're focusing on those things, you probably will go wrong. And you need to stop thinking about how she's gonna like respond to that. Maybe she likes it, maybe she doesn't, you have no control over that. But if you show up as your authentic self, somebody's going to reciprocate with that energy.
That's right. And help me also understand, said, since we're talking about navigating relationships, how can someone navigate between infatuation, attraction, and love? How can either of the genders really understand the difference among the three out there, because often it's not love, it's just that the attraction or the infatuation you have and it towards the other person, or with just the feeling of love. You're not actually loving somebody, but yes, that feeling of love you're having towards somebody, and you're just saying, okay, I love you. But once you get into a relationship, it just gets ugly and you break up. So how can somebody really navigate? I know it's a highly subjective and dynamic space, but any tips out there?
Absolutely. This is a, to be honest, it's such a simple difference. But again, to our point earlier, because we are not taught about this, we often miss out on the subtle differences that would help us differentiate between love versus one on one side and infatuation on the other. Um, the way I think of it is, you want to ask yourself why you are seeking this connection, right? If you ask whether you want the connection for what it is, do you like her or him because of who they are, or because of the future that you have created in your head, that you have projected onto them, right? Maybe they fit this description in your mind where, like, oh, this is the kind of partner that would fulfill all of these dreams. And without actually assessing that, without actually figuring out if this is actually the right partner, we start projecting this dream version of a relationship onto the current relationship. And so that's not the relationship we are in. That's the relationship we want to be in. And we get confused about it. So that is one aspect of, like, who are we really in the connection with? Are we in the connection with the person as is, or what the person probably represents to us based on our dream vision? And the other aspect of this is, how does this person make me feel? When I'm with this person, do I feel safe? Do I feel secure? Do I feel that I can express myself authentically? Or do I feel anxious? Do I feel butterflies? Because oftentimes, depending on the environment we grew up in, those butterflies are not a healthy signal. Those butterflies is our nervous system telling us that this is not the right relationship. But depending on the environment we grew up in, if we are familiar with those butterflies, then our brain is focusing on the familiarity. Our brain, and this is a really important point, our brain is not designed for success. It is not designed for prosperity. It is designed for safety, for protection. And our brain feels most safe when it can predict the outcome of a certain experience, certain event, certain situation. So when we feel that anxiety, even if it is unhealthy, our brain knows that that anxiety is what love has meant to us in our past. And so that feeling of anxiety, the butterflies in our stomach, the giddiness, makes us feel, oh, this must be love again. And not because it's healthy, but because we can predict it. It may not end well. In fact, there is a good chance it won't end well. But because I can predict it, I have control over it, and I can keep you safe. And that's why the connection feels like love, especially if that's what it felt like when you were growing up.
Understood. Help me, moving further towards the childhood trauma side. Now, there could be multiple scenarios out there, and one of the common outcome, and correct me if I'm wrong in saying this,
Absolutely.
is children who have come, through a lot of trauma in their childhood in different manners, often find it difficult either to love somebody, or they always find inclination towards the toxic relationships. They often tend to keep getting into that pattern, and they continuously question, why does it happen with me? Instead of identifying that it's a pattern that they're following.
Right.
Can happen with either of the genders out there. But
Absolutely.
how can somebody really, identify it? What are the telltale signs that they should be looking for?
uh, I love that question because it's not easy to have that awareness of the telltale signs is not easy because and that's exactly why people end up repeating the traumas, right? So I'm going to address it in a few different parts because of the question was is important to address it in all the different aspects. The first aspect is recognizing the childhood trauma itself, right? And a lot of us may be aware of certain traumatic experiences that we may have had as a child. For example, big things like parents getting divorced or going through a bankruptcy filing and losing family, losing our home, losing our possessions and things like that. And so if we have gone through something as deeply traumatic as that, those are things we often remember. And we can assume that to a certain extent they do shape our lives and do shape the choices that we make. The thing that impacts us a lot more, though, are the micro traumas that often don't get remembered in our adult life. So, for example, let's say you're 4 years old, right? You go up to your dad and you say, "Hey, dad, can you play with me?" And he, in all his good intentions, he's just busy with work. And so he doesn't realize what you're looking for. And he says, "Hey, Polka, just go away right now. Talk to me later. I'm really busy." Now, at the age of 4, you don't have the awareness, the maturity, or even the vocabulary to tell your dad, "Hey, I'm just looking for 15 minutes of your time. I just need your attention for the next 5, 10, 15 minutes to show you this masterpiece of a drawing that I have created, and I want you to clap at the drawing, and then you can go back to work," right? In that moment, I either walk away with feeling, "Oh my God, maybe my emotions are too much. Maybe if I share my emotions with my dad, I'm disturbing him." So I learn to hide my emotions in order to be accepted by someone who I love dearly. Or I respond in the exact opposite way, where I say, "Oh, last time I started crying or howling, my dad came running towards me. So maybe if I start crying right now, I'll get that attention that I'm seeking again." Right? And this becomes our coping mechanism. This is how we learn to seek love. This incident is probably not even something you remember when you have grown up. But the coping mechanism that stays on in your subconscious, right? And as we discussed earlier, we're not we're taught math, we're taught languages, we're taught physics, chemistry, computer sciences, or economics, whatever you studied growing up, but we're not taught healthy relationships, we're not taught what healthy love is. And so what we do is we just figure out and piece it together as to how we should seek love. And so now in our adult lives, we are trying to seek love based on these coping mechanisms that we picked up in our childhood, right? We get into relationships where these patterns are repeated. So if we learned to cling on or to be more aggressive or to reach out for attention, then we are looking for relationships right now as well, where we need to keep reaching out, where we need to do a lot more work, where we need to cling on to them and make them like us, especially in circumstances where growing up you were taught that love is something you have to earn, you have to prove yourself to be worthy of it. And if that's the only way you knew how to get love, then now in adult relationships you're trying to get into relationships where you have to keep proving your worth as well. Alternatively, if you realize that your emotions were too much in your childhood and you learned to keep your emotions hidden, then in your adult life, you are seeking relationships which don't make you very vulnerable, that don't challenge your walls that you have built around you, because that is when you feel more safe. So, if there is any level of emotional depth that tries to come up in a relationship, it's your sign to run away from it. And that's the kind of relationships that we attract and get involved. Again, why do we attract this? Because our brain is focused on safety and security and predictability. And so our brain sees the pattern, and even though it knows it is unhealthy, it recognizes that that pattern fits our life, fits our definition of love that we may have created for ourselves in our childhood. And of course, this aspect also shapes our attachment styles and anxiety and avoidance and things like that, which ultimately get us attracted to certain kind of people in our adult romantic situations as well.
Yep. To the whole scenario of trauma so that you just described out here, I would like to bring back again the influence of Bollywood, Hollywood, and other you know examples of love that we get to see, which are usually
Yes,
the utopian examples being
correct,
presented to us. Now,
correct.
for us, at one place where during our childhood, love was not given to us. The child goes through a lot of trauma, as simple as what you just described, getting applaud for the amazing, painting or art that was child would have done. Growing up, that feeling of not being loved is still there. Now you watch either Shah Rukh Khan or Juhi Chawla, romanticizing with each other. You somewhere or the other, start building that utopian definition of love within you. And now,
Absolutely.
when you get into a relationship with that expectation of finding the same definition, where I would say it's also, heterogeneously mixed with the childhood trauma.
Absolutely.
Now you're not finding the definition of love that you define for yourself, getting
Right.
true, standing true out there.
Right.
You start bringing out that coping mechanism, be it of crying, lashing out, being aggressive, or different mechanisms everybody has.
Right.
How can the other partner, I would like to get onto a different side where the other partner can be supportive and
Yes.
give the person at that moment the space that might be required, but eventually help navigate it through for that person, probably from a
Right.
distance or
Right.
by being in a relationship as well. That's the person's
Right.
choice. But tell that person you need to cope up from this.
Right.
How can that sort of a a scenario be created out there?
So, my fundamental belief is that your partner is not meant to be your therapist. Your
Agree.
partner is not meant to be your coach. And it is not your partner's responsibility to help you navigate trauma. I think it's a very unfair responsibility to place on a partner because they are expected to have skills and tools which the average human is not expected to have. They may have the tools for themselves, they may have the awareness, the maturity of how to navigate their own emotions and their own triggers, but they're not supposed to be doing it for the partner, right? And so you mentioned a very important word, which is support. But if a partner wants to support me in the relationship to help me navigate my childhood trauma, there are two things which are very crucial before that. Firstly, I need to have a baseline awareness of my traumas. Even if I'm not aware of my trauma itself, because as we mentioned earlier, you some of these happen because of the micro moments and you don't remember these moments, but it is still important to to recognize and acknowledge your coping mechanisms. When you get triggered, how do you react? Do you walk away? Do you tend to lash out? Do you tend to become more clingy and needy? That is a level of awareness I need to bring to the relationship of when I'm triggered, how do I react? That's the first aspect. And the second aspect, which is equally important, is I need to want to change. Then my partner can help me when I bring her in the right moments, in the right situations, to say, look, I'm going through something really difficult right now, or I'm very triggered right now. This is what you can do for me in order to make me feel calmer in the moment, or this is the level of support you can give to me right now. If you have the capacity to do that, then that would help us co-regulate and for me to feel safer. But expecting the partner to do the work changes this dynamic from co-regulation to codependency, which is a really unhealthy, toxic dynamic to get into, and it's the beginning of the end of the relationship if that happens. Your partner is meant to support you through your own journey of navigating trauma. Your partner can provide a safe space in the relationship where you can, again, express yourself, share your needs more openly, more vulnerably, and not be scared. And that's the part where your partner can play in your healing journey. But your partner can absolutely not become the trigger for healing or responsible for your healing. That responsibility has to be your own.
Continuing on the point of influence said, often the child adapts or mimics what the parents are doing.
Exactly.
How can somebody, as they evolve as an adult, break those adaptations that they have picked up from their parents? Because our parents have come from a generation where mental health was not even a topic to discuss. It never
Absolutely.
existed.
Absolutely.
It has picked up its pace in last decade. So how can the millennials or the upcoming generations really become aware of these things as they move out of, the teenage? Because if I look back myself, the teenage pulkit, the pulkit who was in the years from 20 to 25, 25 to 30, and on the moment he has crossed 30, they are a very different human beings altogether.
Completely. I can imagine.
So the person I'm today is, I would say, very much evolved than what I was at 15 years or 18 years of age. My
Sure.
responses to a lot of things have changed. So
Sure.
rather than responses, I would say reactions, you know.
Absolutely.
So after the age of 30, okay, I understand the tantrums I was throwing or the way I was reacting, it was not appropriate. I needed to evolve from it. But what about somebody who is yet to reach that 30? Because as you move towards 30 or beyond 30, a lot of responsibilities come in. You have seen a lot of society out there. So how can somebody as early as 18, 19, 20, 21 start to navigate it through, or it's too early an age to navigate?
I don't know if it is too early an age to navigate. I mean, we do say that people who are 18 are officially adults anyway. Of course, we cannot trauma dump on them and expect them to navigate the entire load of trauma suddenly at the age of 18, especially if this is a concept that has never been introduced to them. But what we potentially can do is help them be a little bit more aware of their behaviors, right? When they get into a fight, how do they navigate that conflict? When they have a difficult situation, when they feel stressed, when they feel anxious, how do they navigate it? How have they learned to navigate it? And more importantly, where has that learning come from? Is it a re what's the word for it? Is it kind of like a re-imitation or imitation of your parents' behaviors, the parents' coping mechanisms, or is it something you picked up from somewhere else? And how did you learn to cope with the emotional challenges that you're going through in the way that you are coping with them, right? Even if we don't get into the history of it, even if we don't get into the past, where did that come from, how did your parents behave, just the simple fact of I am aware that when I am triggered, I tend to behave in a certain way, whether it is panicking, overthinking, trying to please other people to like me, or in any way, shape, or form. If I start recognizing that, then that consciousness already helps me alleviate that coping mechanism. There's a quote that for the life of me, I cannot remember who said it, but I loved when this was said, is that anything that you are aware of is not a tendency anymore. A tendency is something that you have when you do things kind of in an impulsive way without recognizing that you are doing them. But the moment you become aware of it and you say, oh yes, when this thing happens I tend to behave in that way, now that's a choice, because now you're aware that a certain kind of experience will elicit a certain kind of response in you, and you can choose to respond to that situation differently. If you're aware of your tendencies, you can change the narrative around them and understand how you would want to show up. And so, even if it's as simple as, hey, I feel really upset right now. Can you give me 15 minutes for me to just regulate myself, reconnect with myself, and then we can continue this conversation? Because right now, I'm afraid that if we continue this conversation, it's not going to end as productively as we would both want. It's as simple as that. But that cannot happen if you don't recognize that you have triggers. And another important aspect that you brought up, which I think is really important to address in this context, is a lot of times we blame our parents for the coping mechanisms that we may have learned as a result of the way they offered love, or whatever we learned from them, which may have not been healthy. But it is really important to recognize that therapy, coaching, and all other trauma healing approaches, these are things that our parents did not have access to, and they are also humans living life for the first time. So they were doing the best they could with the knowledge that they had and the coping mechanisms and the traumas that they experienced in their life as well. And so we have to give them that benefit of doubt, or benefit of, yes, you didn't know enough, right? And this journey that I am now creating is not about you anymore, it is about me. I want to be more secure in my life. I want to be healthier in my life. I want to show up differently from how my past may have taught me to show up. And in that process, I may understand where this is coming from, but if I keep blaming you for it, that prevents me from taking the accountability that I need to take in order to rectify the course of actions, in order to choose differently, in order to show up differently, which is what will ultimately help me become the person I want to become.
Just a little detour on the questions line. If you can help our listeners understand the difference between therapy and coaching, because at times people out there really get confused. Who should I be,
Absolutely.
really going out to? So if you can help on this context.
Absolutely. Look, this is a very subjective topic. Everybody has a different definition and different approach for it. I think both therapy and coaching are really relevant and have different benefits. The way I think about them, or the way I have differentiated them, of course, comes from a little bit of my perspective on therapy, the therapy that I have gone through, and the way I approach my coaching. And so this is where the difference is coming from. I have only experienced talk therapy, and my therapists were typically focused on, tell me about how your week was. What are the kind of emotions you experienced? What are the experiences that you may have had? And it provided a safe environment of with somebody who understands me to just talk and dump my emotions and feel lighter, which is important for for certain aspects of life and certain things that you're navigating. The way I think of coaching is it's very goal oriented. It is not about just talking, it is about recognizing where you are in the moment, what is the goal you are seeking, and how do we, in a very actionable, tangible manner, help you get there. The best way I can explain this, and I think this resonates a lot when I try to talk about this topic, is let's take an example of fitness coaching. You go to a fitness coach and you say, hey, I want to lose 5 kgs in the next 6 months. Now, that is a very tangible goal. I am X kgs right now. I want to be X minus 5 kgs in 6 months' time. And then your fitness coach gives you a workout routine, a diet chart, maybe supplements, maybe hydration plan about how much water you should be consuming, how much sleep you should be getting. And you are now following all of this curriculum, and you keep interacting with your coach to help both of you understand what is working, what is not working. At the end of the day, all of this is targeted to get you to your goal. So if I ask you to do burpees and you for some reason can't do burpees, then I will have to change your fitness workout routine to do something else that still aligns with the goal that you're looking for. That's where coaching comes into play. So for example, the people who work with me, they're focused on, I want to move on from my heartbreak, deal with the anxiety that I show in my relationships, and learn how to build a healthy relationship. So the goal is focused on navigating heartbreak, navigating childhood trauma, and building a healthy relationship. And that can be structured into a very tangible, actionable process of doing some reflective exercises, of becoming more aware of yourself, of understanding what your historical definition of love was based on your childhood patterns, based on the love you experienced from your parents, versus what a healthy definition of love is that you want to adopt in order to be in the relationship you want to be in. That's the process that I help people navigate.
Amazing, amazing. Thanks a lot for that. And now moving back to the point where you were discussing about benefit of doubt, I myself, you know, I'm a very big believer of giving benefit of doubt. But what about drawing boundaries, Sid? How do we really bring both together?
This is such an important concept. I'm so glad you brought it up, right? This is a very important part of the definition of love that we create, because I'm sure you may have heard or maybe even experienced um, your parents reading your diary, or checking your phone, or looking into your almirah. Now, these are things which, fortunately or unfortunately, are very common in Indian society, right? And there are six archetypes of childhood trauma. I'm not going to get into the details of all of that right now, but one of those archetypes is when parents don't know how to emulate boundaries. And what happens is that when our parents, let's say, read our diary, normal consequence of that is that we get punished for it, we get shamed for it, we because of what we may have written. But at the end of the day, it is a breach of our privacy. And now, what our brain does is it starts connecting. Oh, if you love someone, maybe it's okay to breach boundaries. And now, in your adult life, when you're approaching romantic relationships, you seek relationships where you constantly breach their boundaries because you think it's all being done in the name of love. You allow your partner to breach your boundaries because, again, you think that that's closely associated with the definition of love. But that's, of course, the foundation of a really unhealthy relationship. It causes a lot of resentment, it causes a lot of toxicity, and it often does not allow you to healthily navigate that because your fundamental belief is that love needs to mean breach of boundaries as well. On the other end of the spectrum, if your boundaries were breached as children, you learn to become really protective and really defensive around loved ones. And so now in your adult relationships, you choose not to show up as your full self because what if this is misused against me? What if I'm punished for showing up as authentically as I would like to? And so, in order to be in this loving relationship, given that they could breach my boundaries, I need to stay absolutely hidden, which of course is the beginning of a really unhealthy relationship that leads to a lot of resentment, a lot of unmet needs, and just lack of fulfillment. And so, in our adult lives, as we build more awareness of healthy relationships, a really important concept becomes maintaining boundaries, not just with our partner, but also with our friends, with our family members, and only giving them access in a healthy way to yourself. And this thing about boundaries that I really love, right? If you think about a castle has boundaries all around it. Now, those that the boundary around the castle is not meant to push people away. It is just meant to protect what is within. When I draw a boundary, I'm not pushing people away. I'm just telling them this is how I want to be loved. Oftentimes, people who are most upset by you drawing boundaries are people who are truly upset about the control that they had over you that they have now lost, right? And so if you think about boundaries in a healthy way, and if you're aware that yes, some people may get pushed, but you're not trying to push them, they're getting pushed because of their own insecurities and because of their own level of access they wanted to have on you, and you don't need to give them that access just because they want it, right? And when we're able to implement this, we're able to keep a lot of people at the distance that we would, that allows us to stay healthy, that allows us to recuperate from our traumatic experiences, truly feel aligned to the person that we want to become, and navigate healthy relationships in a much more aligned and synchronous way.
When you were explaining about therapy versus coaching, you talked about the talk therapy where you were given a chance to talk how your week was, how you're feeling. Do you believe the culture of joint family as it becomes extinct is the reason where we need more of therapists rather than friends out there, where we are not finding that ear where we could just vent out or just speak out whatever we wanted to without any fear of prejudice? What are your thoughts on that?
So I may not be the best person to answer this because I didn't grow up in a joint family, and I don't have any statistics to indicate the correlation between joint family and having a safe space to share your feelings. I think what it, in my experience, what it really boils down to is um, whether you had the safe space or not, right? And a lot of people have that safe space even in a nuclear family where they are very close to their parents and they feel that they can express to their parents whatever happened at school or whatever happened with their boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever. And so that there is a respect and safe space that is prevalent, that can be prevalent in a very nuclear family itself, right? At the same time, that same space can completely be absent in a joint family. um, in the typical Bollywood version of a joint family, there is this hierarchical structure where there is one person who leads the entire family and makes decisions for the entire family. Again, I don't know how true or not that is in the real world. I would assume it's not as true as it's depicted in the movies. But it, it could be that you live in a joint family and you still feel lonely. You still feel alone. You still feel that you don't have the safe space to have these difficult conversations, to express your needs, to go against someone who is higher than you in the hierarchical ladder, right? And so I don't know if there's a correlation between nuclear versus or joint family versus expressing of emotions, but I do believe that there is a need to express emotions. And a lot of this could be mitigated through close friendships. A lot of this could be mitigated um, through having close family members, cousins who you have strong relationships with, support environments where everybody is dealing with similar consequences or similar challenges and you help brainstorm solutions with each other. So, yes, the need for a space like that is definitely essential. Whether therapy is the only space, I don't think so. Can therapy be a very good space for it? Absolutely. But it also depends on what you are looking for. Therapy can be a very good space if you want to listen, but therapy adds to helping you understand some of these things a lot better than maybe your friends could, maybe your family members could. Again, because they're not equipped with the psychological and neuroscientific knowledge that is required to help you process some of these things. And they shouldn't be as well, right? It is a lot of pressure to expect your friends to have that knowledge to help you through a lot of turmoil situations or tumultuous situations. And that's where therapy can bridge the gap in terms of helping you understand those emotions more intimately.
So, see, help me understand, do therapists make a good partner out there?
This is so tricky. Do therapists make good partners out there? I think it's a very blanket statement.
Mhm.
Do therapists have the tools to be a good partner? Yes. Are they always the best partner? Maybe not, right? Because with that knowledge, and I'm going to quote this, with great power comes great responsibility. But the challenge with this is that therapists are humans too, right? And uh, a lot of times they're doing the best they can from a theoretical knowledge perspective. And they may not be able to address it in the emotional manner that the situation requires, right? Sometimes their own emotions can get the better of them because even if they have the theoretical knowledge, they may not be able to be constantly regulated all the time. And the expectation shouldn't even be that they are permanently regulated just because they have the tools to be regulated, right? The expectation should be that they're aware of their triggers, they're aware of their traumas, and they can come back to a state of regulation hopefully easily than somebody who was never taught how to regulate their emotions. But at the end of the day, we also need to recognize that relationships change with time, right? If you started dating someone at the age of 21, and you get married to them at the age of 25, and you have a child with them at the age of 30, you buy a house with them at the age of 35, do you think you're the same person at the age of 35 as you were at 21? I would really hope not, right? And so when you are in a relationship, even if it's with the same person at the age of 35, that relationship looks very different than when you were 21. And if you don't have the mental capacity, the physical capacity, the emotional capacity to evolve with that relationship as the relationship evolves, then maybe at some point in time, the disconnection between the two people will increase naturally. And this has nothing to do with whether one of them has a therapist or not. I know that was a very long-winded answer and probably does not even answer the question as directly, but I think expecting a therapist to be better at relationships is probably an unfair expectation.
No, I totally, align with you. And more or less, this was something I was looking at. Because expecting a doctor to be always healthy is a similar situation, expecting a therapist to be perfect in a relationship. I totally align with that. Um, one of the final questions, penultimate questions to you, Sid, would be accepting no. Now, I've got two parts to it, but yes, first I would like to discuss about the acceptance of the word no in the relationships. And there are so many scenarios I can, bring up, and we can discuss it at length to an never-ending conversation.
Absolutely.
But in general, why is it so hard to accept no?
I think uh, accepting, and this comes back to boundaries as well, right? But accepting no because of our traumatic experiences in the past, because of the things that we may have gone through, we end up taking it a lot more personally than we should, right? When you are going through an experience where you're not getting something you wanted, it's very natural to make it about you. And then our anxiety, our traumatic experiences in the past, our sense of rejection, abandonment, all of those feelings that come up create narratives around it as well. And oftentimes that no has nothing to do with you. It has a lot more to do with the capacity of the person who is saying no, right? Or the wants and desires and needs of the person who is saying no. And if we are able to take a step back and not take everything personally, we probably will be able to navigate that situation with either very little conflict or maybe no conflict at all. When we start recognizing that it's probably not even about us in the first place. That person who is saying no is just drawing a boundary based on his or her capacity to meet my needs right now. Maybe when that person says no, a lot of narratives come up of like, you're not good enough, you don't deserve as much, maybe they don't love me, maybe they're going to leave me. And all of these stories are often not real. They're just stories that keep coming back because of the experiences we may have had in the past. Why can't we just take a step back and recognize maybe they can't give it to me because they don't have it in them to give it to me? Maybe they don't have the emotional bandwidth, maybe they don't have the physical bandwidth, maybe they don't have the mental capacity, maybe they don't recognize how important this need is for me at this point in time and how important it is for them to address it. If we change the narrative, if we stop taking it so personally and just focus on the fact of it, we'll be able to address the situation much more easily.
Understood. Whilst, accepting no is hard, the harder part is saying no. What are your thoughts on that? I have seen so many scenarios where, especially when what I've seen so far in the previous generations, I'm not sure of the current generations, but in previous generations, especially the females had a difficult time saying no, drawing those boundaries.
Okay.
And slowly and steadily, even males, the stories around the male part is also coming out. So why is it so difficult to say no?
Because in whatever societal hierarchy we were living in, men were expected to be superior to women, and therefore women were not allowed to say no to men. I'm so glad that that culture is changing now, if not fully changed. But that disparity in hierarchy is unhealthy, not just from a relationship perspective, but also for family dynamics and for society generally, especially the way society is currently evolving. And so, but if you were taught that you're supposed to say that you can't say no, you're supposed to accept anything that is being thrown at you because you are in some hierarchical position, and the reference is that you're below the person or beneath the person who is giving you the command, then that of course makes it really difficult to say no. But at least in the modern world, coming back to the society that we currently live in, as you mentioned, it's still difficult for a lot of people to say no to. To say no to the people who are asking favors of them, right? Or asking things of them. And what I want us to really come back to is awareness. When we struggle to say no, what is going on inside of us? Is it because we genuinely have the mental, physical, emotional capacity to deliver that? Or are we saying no or are we not saying no because we want to be liked? Because we want importance, because we want consideration, because we want acknowledgement. And so it really depends on what is the need that we are doing this for. And this is when I talk about this with the people I work with, I talk about this in the terms of the difference between kindness and people pleasing, right? They're often misinterpreted and confused. Kindness is, you needed my kindness, I had it in me to give it to you, so I gave it to you. I don't ask anything of you because I gave you my kindness. People pleasing, on the other hand, comes back to, I need you to validate me. I'm being really nice to you. I'm being really kind to you. But because I need you to like me more, I need you to acknowledge me more. I need you to tell me that I am worthy. And when you are approaching saying yes to people all the time because you feel deeply unworthy, that is the area that we need to work a lot more on to build that self worth, to build that self confidence, to be able to say no and respect the capacity that we have and respect the priorities that our life may have at that moment. Whereas, if it is coming from a genuinely healthy place, when you know you have the bandwidth to do the favor that has been asked of you without it having any negative repercussions on you, but also without really requiring anything of them, then go ahead and do it. And then there is no need to have a conversation about whether this is yes or no for you.
Understood. But help me understand, said the battle between communication and assumptions in a relationship.
Right.
Often we hear, the spouse is saying that it should have been done. You should have done this. I expected you to do this. Now, vis-a-vis, if somebody said that, um, Pulkit, can you do this for me? The scenario would have been much different out there.
Absolutely. And communication is a really, really important topic, which I'll be very honest, we don't have the bandwidth to get into right now because there could be so much that we could just talk about when we talk about communication in relationships already. But to your point, yes, communication is really fundamental. The way I think of relationships is, a relationship has three key pillars. The first is awareness, and we've spoken about awareness a lot. Being aware of your own triggers, your own traumas, being aware of your partner's needs, values, boundaries, principles, and also being aware of your relationship. The second is authenticity. When you are aware of what your needs are, when you're aware of yourself, you're able to show up more as yourself, and you're able to be more authentic, more genuine with your partner, instead of trying to hide yourself in any way or be extremely needy or clingy. You can just show up as yourself. And the third that kind of pieces this all together is communication, right? In order to be authentically yourself with your partner, you need to know how to communicate authentically. When you mentioned, and of course, this is assumption based on very limited knowledge, but when one person speaks to the other as this should have been done, well, let's understand that. Was there a prior communication about roles and responsibilities between us? Was there a clear segmentation that this is something that is my responsibility and therefore it should have been done by me? Was there a timeline set to it? Without these conversations in the past, if there is an assumption based on gender or based on financial profile or based on any other immaterial aspect in the relationship, then that's naturally unhealthy, right? If there is an expectation that this should have been done by you just because you're a woman, or because you earn lesser than I do, or because I run the family and therefore I'm superior than you, those dynamics cannot possibly make for a good relationship, right? But at the same time, we have to recognize that, and this is absolutely key, when we're facing a problem, especially in a relationship, it's the two people against the problem. It's not the two people against each other. And so let's say there is a conflict situation that arrives. To your point, hey, can you help me do this? right? Because we're a team. We're figuring out the solution to this problem together. I need your help to do this because I cannot do it by myself, or you are better at it than I would be, or for whatever reason. But that's a need, and that's a valid need that you can express to your partner, and your partner can hopefully address that need as well. But if it comes from a place of superiority that you should have done it without us ever having a conversation about it, that's what makes it really unhealthy. And that changes the power dynamics in a relationship, which cannot make it long term sustainable.
Understood. Understood. Uh, Sid, we started this podcast with the topic of loneliness amidst the crowd when we are in. How can, if I'm in a relationship, how can I communicate to my partner that even being in a relationship with you, I feel lonely? What are the, right words or the way of communicating to that to my partner?
This is a really important conversation because, and people should be having this in early stages of their dating itself. And this conversation really boils down to love languages, right? This conversation boils into, we have five love languages: words of affirmation, physical touch, gifts, quality time, and acts of service. And all of us have learned to give or receive love in one of these five ways. We feel most loved when people offer us love in one of these five. These are the five languages that have historically been known. And so, if I'm not feeling loved by you, there's a quote that I'm forgetting who said this, but I really love, which says, just because you love me doesn't mean I feel loved by you. And this is really a gap between whether you are giving me love in the way I understand love, right? So yes, you can be in a relationship and you can still feel lonely because you can still have needs that are unmet, and you may need your partner to show up in a different manner to be able to make you feel loved in that moment, right? And so if your partner keeps telling you, hey, let's hang out, let's do this on Saturday, let's do that on Sunday, let's go for dinner, what your partner is trying to do is make you feel special by spending a lot of time with you. But maybe time is not a luxury you have at the moment, maybe because you have 20 other things going on in your life and you cannot afford to spend that much time with them. Or more importantly, you don't feel loved by just spending time. You need them to remind you of how accomplished you are, or give you the praises, the words of affirmation. Or maybe they need to make you feel special by doing things for you, maybe little things, maybe big things, but when they do those things, for example, they washed the dishes, even though it was your duty to, or your time on the roster to have washed the dishes. They chose to just wash it for you and make it less burdensome for you, right? Those are things that make you feel loved, make you feel special. So it's really important to communicate to your partner what those love languages are, and be aware of the love languages of both individuals. This is also coming back to the awareness aspect of how does this relationship really grow. And another important point in this is, love languages are not permanent. Depending on the life that you have lived, depending on the phase of life you are in, maybe you need to be loved or want to be loved differently from how you wanted to be loved 5 years ago, right? As I mentioned to you, you start a relationship at 21, you have the same relationship at 35, hopefully you have the same relationship at 60, when if you still want that relationship. But in order to get it to 60, we need to be aware of how the love languages may be changing and continue offering love in ways where our partner feels comfortable receiving, so that ultimately it's important that they know that they are loved, not just us loving them.
Well, well, what would be one tip that you would like to give to people out there navigating relationships?
Communicate. Show up in a relationship in a way where you feel communication can happen, and communication is a two-way street, right? Communication is not just me dumping my needs on you. Communication is also me creating a healthy space for us to have a conversation. If you feel scared communicating your emotions to me, then somehow the communication between the two of us is broken. If you feel scared expressing your needs to me because you think that I may run away or I may leave you or you're not worthy, communication gets broken. Or if I start taking you for granted and communicate all my needs expecting that they will be met, again something is broken because we are not on the same page about understanding each other's needs and being able to address them in a healthy manner to sustain that relationship. So understand what your fears are, understand what holds you back or pushes you forward, and communicate with your partner. You have no idea how many challenges we could navigate in a relationship if we just knew how to communicate.
I totally agree, and I'm so in awe that you brought up the point of communicate as a tip out, as the tip to be given to the people navigating relationships. Before we wind up, Sid, one anecdote from your experience so far helping people navigate relationships that you would like to share with our listeners.
Wow, there are so many anecdotes about navigating healthy relationships. I think we all want a healthy relationship. Some of us have put walls around us because of our past experiences. Some of us still get stuck in self doubt and self worth and sabotage a healthy relationship if it chooses to show up. And there are several case studies that I have of people who know that they want a healthy relationship, but more importantly, who know who did they deserve a healthy relationship. And in order to deserve a healthy relationship, they're willing to put the work in. They're willing to put the work in of navigating the beliefs that they are carrying about themselves, about partnerships, about relationships, about situations from their past. They're willing to do the work on the trauma that they may be carrying, on the triggers that continue to influence them, and they're willing to show up differently, all because they believe that they deserve a healthy relationship. And so the one thing I want to tell people, everybody who could listen to this, is you deserve a healthy relationship. Don't hold yourself back from getting one.
Well, thanks a lot, Sid. Thanks a lot for, helping us navigate this topic of relationship and childhood trauma, its impact on relationship out there. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this, Pulkit. I really appreciate being here and for getting this opportunity to navigate this conversation with you. Hopefully, it is helpful to the people who listen to it.
I'm sure. I'm sure. And listeners, today we have journeyed deeply, peeling back layers of emotions, anxieties, and memories that shape our relationship and sense of self. Remember, you are not alone in navigating these complexities. If today's conversation resonated with you, we encourage you to share your stress triggers, worries, or emotional burdens, either as a comment if you feel comfortable or on our anonymous mental health platform, the link for which would be available in the description. And yes, if you're looking to navigate your relationships, you can get in touch with Sid. His details would also be there in description, or you can DM us. We will connect you with him. Until then, thanks for tuning in to We Are Listening. And until next time, take care and be gentle with yourself.